I was part of the audit team that completed this NALDIC audit, which we carried out in partnership with, as part of our partnership with the Bell Foundation. I was also part of the audit team who delivered the initial NALDIC audit into professional development and training. That initial audit was funded by the TDA and took place in 2009. The aim of that audit was to inform what was then to be a 5-year strategy by the TDA to develop EAL practice in England. The TDA 5-year strategy never, it would be fair to say, never really came to its full fruition, and it was ended shortly after the general election in 2010. But the audit itself, the initial audit was published, and what we thought was important to do was to revisit what we'd done in 2009, to look again at the issues in 2013. This second audit was slightly smaller than the initial audit. The first audit covered around 200 courses and 11,000 staff, and this audit that I'm going to talk to you about today covered around 5,000 participants, and so it was roughly half the size. What we did is we decided that it would be really useful to just repeat the audit questions, so as we were able to look at some changes and comparisons between the two. So the survey questions remained the same as in 2009. Okay, so over 100 training courses were looked at, and we also looked at, had submissions concerning the training for teachers in training, and trainee teachers, as well as training participants. In terms of what we did, we put out an online survey. We also submitted survey returns to local authorities. We did, however, have a very low local authority return compared to 2009. In those 5 years, we found, as no one in this room who knows local authorities will be surprised to hear, is that actually we couldn't even identify in most local authorities who the applicable person would be to send the survey through to. Whereas in 2009, people were saying to us, well, there's now only me, but I'll fill your form in for you. In 2013, there was not even somebody who had that under their kind of work remit. It's really tricky. The survey questions were designed to elicit information about the length of the training, the content. We also had a participant survey, so as we were looking to get some more qualitative data on participants' experience of EAL training. We had first to look at whether it was EAL training or not, because we did have some submissions that actually we didn't consider to be EAL training because they featured largely EFL training. So we restricted ourselves to look at stuff which purported to be useful to teachers within the classroom, looking at English and additional language learners within mainstream schools within the UK. For this training, for this audit, because of the range of training providers, we also went to do a set of follow-up interviews with around 18 providers, and when the audit is published, the transcripts or the findings from those interviews are included in the appendices. Some of the differences between 2009 and this audit were that a higher proportion of the participants were identified as class and subject teachers, demonstrating possibly that EAL has become yet more of an issue for all mainstream and subject class or subject teachers. There was a marked reduction in the percentage of staff who classified themselves as teaching support staff. Really dramatic fall in that number, from something like 35% in our original audit to only 11%. I'm not going to say why that might be. but we do know that whilst those staff are in schools, there is a difficulty in those staff getting adequate training. The other percentages in terms of the training audit were not particularly different. The main findings were that, as in 2009, the whole area of EAL training is particularly patchy, despite the graph that we've just seen that shows that ever-increasing number of EAL learners in the UK compared and contrasted to a declining monolingual English first language population. As in 2009, we found that there was considerable variation regionally, considerable variation between different local authorities. And one of the things that we saw was that there was very limited differentiated training for groups of staff. One of the differences between the first audit and the second audit was that in the second audit we gathered details of very few courses that were aimed specifically at people in specific roles within schools. In our first audit, there was some evidence of, for example, EAL specialists or EAL coordinators, or indeed teaching assistants. By the second audit, most of what we gathered was EAL in general. So there would be a course called EAL. It would probably be open to anybody. It would probably be paid for by somebody. It was very limited free training. And it probably lasted half a day to a day. So in a nutshell, that is what a teacher or somebody working within a school is most likely to access as EAL training. One day, undifferentiated, paid for, non-regulated, and half a day to a day. That was the most frequent provision. So in terms of the conclusion from the audit is, that relevant EAL, extended EAL training for both mainstream and specialist staff is not consistently available nationally. In terms of positives, what we did see is that whereas perhaps in 2009, I think over half of the training was provided by local authorities, there had been a growth in the different variety of providers. So local authorities, HEIs, schools or academy chains, and clearly that is an area that would be increasing. Professional associations, including NALDIC, independent freelance trainers, and private providers. This reflects the diversification of the educational landscape to a great extent, but it does create difficulties in terms of, first of all, individual teachers or schools finding out where appropriate training may be, and also any attempt to kind of quality sure training across the field would have to engage with far more organisations now than they would have done, say, certainly 10 years ago.